That's a very good question. What does the co-lead game designer of Uncharted 3 do?
We're primarily in charge of making sure that the game. How do you even describe it?
It's so hard. I mean, I look at it as a game designer being the storyteller, you know, the director, the crafter of the experience.
A co-lead game designer at Naughty Dog is responsible for whatever we got to do right now.
That can mean maybe coming up with a good idea. It very often means listening to good ideas from our teammates all around us, not just on the design team, but the artists and the animators, the programmers and the audio people, the visual effects guys that we work with. All are terrific game designers in their own ways.
We wear a lot of hats. I mean, all the leads at Naughty Dog, we have a lot more responsibility, I think, than a lot of studios because we don't have in-house producers. We kind of are the managers and producers of the team.
They're really the ones who handle the scheduling and making sure that all of the individual animations and foreground assets and physics assets and whatever else may be necessary for their levels get into the game at the right time and work awesome and have the design specs and everything of that sort.
My main job is sort of corralling the designers into a sort of coherent vision for what the game is going to come out like and how we translate what we call the active cinematic experience into a gameplay that the player is going to like and be interested in all the time.
I think a game designer's first and most important role is to be an advocate for the player. We're always thinking about the player's experience, really from the very beginning when they become aware of the game, all the way through to when they're putting in their 100th hour in our multiplayer game. We're always thinking about how can we make their experience better, how can we draw them further into the fictional interactive world that we've created, and how can we entertain them and surprise them and delight them.
We're unwilling to settle for anything other than what we consider to be the best possible experience that we can create.
The whole idea of the active cinematic experience, the playable Hollywood blockbuster, only barely made it in. There was like one moment in Uncharted 1 that pretty much everyone picked out as like, that's the bit that we want to do in Uncharted 2. And so Uncharted 2 was, hey, that little moment, that 30 seconds of gameplay, how do we make a game that evokes that the entire time?
Uncharted 2 was an amazing experience, putting that game together, creating all of that new technology, and doing the groundbreaking things that we did with it. There were so many things in Uncharted 2 that we did that had never been done before. In particular, in terms of having characters running around, interacting on an environment that could move. And so I guess in the process of making Uncharted 3, we really took that idea and ran with it.
Don't.
Stay down.
We now felt like we had more freedom and time and energy to explore more of the artistic aspects of it. As storytellers, it's really important to us that the viewer is engaged with our characters. What we really put a lot of focus on, especially with Drake, is to convey thought through his body language. When he's in an environment where a tense environment, like we want him to show that. When he's relaxed, we want you to see that. And so we've been able to change the way that he moves based on his environment, based on where he's at in the story. There might be sections where Drake is just completely exhausted, and when you stop moving him, he'll just collapse to the ground, and you kind of pick him back up again, and you feel kind of like, come on, like let's go, it's just a little bit further, we can do this. And it's something that I hope the players appreciate.
Suddenly we have the great majority of the technology that we need to make the type of game that we wanted to make from the beginning. And the question becomes, well, where do we go from here? Immediately, we thought about desert, sand. Sand is a very big challenge technologically. It flows and moves and mounds and changes and shifts like water, but also in a more viscous way. So there are all sorts of different gameplay ideas that came from that.
I see him!
If we could do anything at all that we wanted to do with the same kind of technology, what could we do? And that's what's led us to think of insane things like a whole level which turns, through 90 degrees at key stages of the gameplay on the sinking cruise ship.
The cruise ship is one of the most technologically advanced levels I've ever worked on, and certainly I think any other company's worked on. Like, the cruise ship's being driven by a real-time wave ocean simulation that drives the animation of the ship, so it never cycles the same way twice. It feels different every time you play it.
When I started the cruise ship, I was actually planning on faking most of that with animation. But then we have this awesome guy, Carlos Gonzalez here, and he was like, why would you do that? Why would you fake it with an animation when we can make you a fully procedural ocean?
Nice day for a boat ride.
That's one of the other really funny things about Naughty Dog is that I asked for a simpler feature, and Carlos gave me a real-time fully procedural ocean. That's how Naughty Dog rolls.
The other sort of big thing that we try to do is to make sure that our multiplayer this time felt much more diverse and interesting, and sort of make it a big ticket item.
So what does Uncharted mean, right? Like, it's not only like this big cinematic experience, right? It's also about like your comrades, right? Like the people who you're working with all the time, right? And so we looked at that and like, well, what do we do about that? Okay, well, let's come up with the buddy system. And in single player, we have this cargo plane, and it's really cool sequence in single player. It's extraordinary. And I saw that, and I went to Evan Wells, and I said, Evan, we need to use that in a multiplayer map. I'm thinking like the plane's gonna come down this runway, there's gonna be moving trucks around the plane, you're gonna be jumping plane to plane to truck to plane. It's gonna be epic, it's gonna be amazing, it's gonna be incredible. It was one of the most hardest things I've done in my entire life.
I saw that and I was like, I thought about all the people that went into making that, the animators and the foreground artists, and Kurt just sitting there and hooking everything up in all the different possible ways it could work. And I was like, we're crazy. So many weeks of work went into less than a 30-second sequence. I look at the stuff that we do, and I can't believe how much love each individual person puts into the stuff that they're responsible for.
I think that kind of attention to detail is really important for a number of different reasons, but the most important reason is that people recognize it and they love it.
It's those moments that make a Naughty Dog game different. So when you ask why are we passionate about what we do, it's because we're given the opportunity to do this, and we're surrounded by people who can do it and who want to do it.
We have an incredible amount of resources at our disposal, but we think so much bigger than what we have, that there's always something that's pushing us to go a little bit further.
The way the studio gets things done is because people care. And the mentality of the company is, if we see you care so much, then we'll let you go and go take care of it. And I think that's really what makes the company come together.
The game starts simultaneously in the hands of the designers and then in the hands of the writers, Amy specifically. And so they're kind of in parallel. Amy's writing the story and the designers are designing levels. So sometimes a level is designed long before we have any clue what the story is.
It's a very creative environment, and I think in all creative environments you can't just start 2 years before the project is supposed to be released and say, okay, here's a blueprint of what it's supposed to be. Everyone go off, do their thing, and then we'll meet back here in 2 years and it will be perfect. No. That's not how it works.
One of the things that we wanted to do for this project was to improve the way that the artists could work with the engine. It was a bit rigid, and we were foreseeing a lot more sort of action scenes and cinematic events and all of these things, which require a lot more sort of specific control over the environment.
We've expanded the scope in pretty much every way. Every feature we could think of that would make the game better, we tried it. Most of the time we kept it in. A couple things we tried and didn't like, but in general we've just made everything much bigger and better.
It's very creative in the beginning. After our brainstorming meetings, we know that there's some things we can go off and start pushing the technology in the direction that we know we might go, but yeah, the storyline, which characters, what they will do, that's all up in the air, and it really comes late in the project.
If you come up with some part of the story that's really neat, but is not going to be very fun, you have to negotiate with the designers. Okay, how can we change the story slightly to make this gameplay fun? And then you have vice versa. If you have a really cool bit of gameplay that doesn't make any sense in the story at all, you have to figure, okay, what can we do? Can we add characters in? Can we take characters out? Can we move them around? For instance, there's a chase scene in Yemen in Uncharted 3 where we're chasing a guy through a level. We had no idea who that guy was for, I'd say, about a year and a quarter. But we had the level. We made it. We didn't know who he was going to be. And then finally the story caught up, and then, boom, we know who that is now.
We were really approaching movie-like quality now in video games, and you have to put some serious effort into adding the detail. One of the main focuses is obviously characters. Our whole game is about characters and making sure that we can really deliver the environment and the storytelling that Amy and all of our designers want to portray in the game. We need to facilitate that somehow, and that is pushing the boundaries for how we do character animation, pushing the boundaries of grounding in the environment, things we didn't have in Uncharted 2 that just adds that little extra believability to the game. For example, if you're running really fast into a corridor with a 90-degree turn, you don't just happily take the corner, you actually kind of struggle, you touch the wall maybe to push yourself forward. That was one of the character and the animators' vision, if you will. They really wanted the characters to look better. But on the other hand, we also have many customers, and one of them would be our game designers.
I remember Jacob Minkoff, one of the lead designers on U3. I remember at the very beginning, when he came up with the cruise ship level, and he kind of laid it all out. He was like, okay, tell me now if this is impossible. And we were like, it's too cool to be impossible. We have to find a way to do it.
A ship seems like a great thing, it's something which makes it more interesting because it's actually moving. So when you climb on a boat, it's quite different from climbing on a solid structure. The biggest change for us in terms of graphics was that now you're talking about a whole group of things that is together, moving together. So essentially they're levels that are strung together, and the whole level is moving. It's not individual object, it's a level that is moving. And we didn't have that before, so we needed to implement that.
We had technological challenges for almost every single level. The burning and collapsing building while you're in it. The cruise ship that is actually being driven by huge, enormous waves to rotate an environment 90 degrees and have the character and the objects and everything still work. And now you're walking on like the side of the environment instead of the floor. It's not something that's trivially accomplished.
For instance, the water pouring down the hallways, we tried a bunch of different things. Our original plan was to do it using like some sort of real-time physics stuff, and then we tried offline physics, and then we went back to real-time, and then we finally came up with animating offline physics simulations and then bringing them into the game and then mixing them with different real-time physics at the same time, kind of a hybrid approach. And all of that stuff, we kept failing over and over until we finally figured it out. It's how almost all of the stuff gets in the game. We fail about 100 times, and then we get one. We finally figure it out, and then it's it.
There's a spark in everyone to create something, and give them enough things to play with. They'll create something awesome.
We love our open floor plan, the ability for everybody to hear what's going on just by sitting down. Just if you're working normally, you will hear everything that's going on around you, which is awesome. It takes a little getting used to if you're easily distracted, but sometimes being easily distracted is good because you'll be able to influence something that needs your input that maybe they didn't know they needed your input.
It is so fulfilling walking away and saying, you know what, that game we made, it wasn't just, which we hope, obviously, well received by our fans, but it was fun to make. Like we are engineers, we're game players, we write story, we write game design, but at the end of the day, we like playing games.